No one in that room realized the betrayal had already happened. Not the men in suits. Not the staff. Not even the man who owned the night. Because the danger wasn't waiting outside the restaurant. It was standing right beside him, silent, trusted, and already paid for. And the only person who noticed was the waitress. No one was watching. The restaurant had been sealed off hours earlier. Not officially. Not with signs or locked doors. Just quietly, through reservations that were suddenly unavailable, through staff schedules that had been reduced to the bare minimum, through a subtle understanding that tonight's guests were not the kind you asked questions about. By the time the Mafia boss arrived, the room already belonged to him. He stepped inside without urgency, moving the way men do when they believe nothing in the room can surprise them. Dark suit. No tie. Jacket unbuttoned. His posture relaxed, almost casual, but every movement precise. The kind of calm that wasn't natural, learned through years of surviving moments where panic got people killed. 2 men entered before him. 2 after. And 1 stayed at his shoulder. The bodyguard. He was tall, broad, unremarkable in the way professionals are. No flashy jewelry. No unnecessary gestures. His eyes scanned the room once, twice, then settled into stillness. To anyone watching, he was exactly what he was supposed to be. Trusted. The boss took his seat at the private table near the back, positioned so the wall protected one side and the room lay open in front of him. A habit. One he'd never broken. Wine was poured. The first course arrived. Everything was perfect. And that was the problem. Across the room, the waitress adjusted her grip on the tray and waited. She had learned early how to be invisible. How to move without drawing attention. How to listen without appearing to listen at all. Years of service had taught her where to stand, when to look down, when to speak, and, most importantly, when not to. Tonight, she followed those rules carefully. She approached the table, set down the plates, and stepped back without meeting anyone's eyes. Her uniform was crisp. Her hair pulled back tight. Her expression neutral. Just another worker doing her job. But her ears were open. She caught fragments first. Half sentences. Numbers spoken too softly to be casual. A location mentioned once, then never again. The kind of conversation that sounded harmless if you weren't listening for patterns. She moved away, heart steady. Then she heard something that didn't fit. The bodyguard spoke. It wasn't what he said. It was how. Too relaxed. Too familiar. A sentence delivered without urgency, as if the outcome was already decided. As if timing no longer mattered. The waitress slowed her steps. From the corner of the room, she watched him check his phone, not openly, not carelessly. Just a glance. Quick. Almost respectful. She had seen that look before. Not in restaurants. Not at tables like this. But on people who were waiting for confirmation. The boss laughed at something one of the men said. A low, easy laugh. He lifted his glass, confident, unaware that anything had shifted. The waitress felt it then, a tightness just below her ribs. A sense that the room had changed shape. She replayed the conversation in her head, stitching together the pieces she hadn't realized she was collecting. The timing. The phrasing. The silence that followed certain words. Her fingers tightened around the tray. This wasn't a deal being discussed. It was a conclusion. She told herself she was wrong. That she was reading too much into it. That powerful men always spoke in riddles and pauses. But something about the bodyguard's stillness wouldn't let her dismiss it. He wasn't alert. He was finished. As she passed the table again, she noticed the way he'd positioned himself, slightly farther than usual. Just enough to create space. Just enough to not be in the way. A small detail. The kind that meant everything. The waitress reached the service station and stopped, her back to the room. Her reflection stared back at her from the stainless steel surface, calm on the outside, unsettled underneath. If she was right, the danger wasn't coming later. It was already scheduled. And the man who believed he controlled the room was the only one who didn't know it. She swallowed and picked up another tray. Because once you notice something like that, you don't get to unsee it. And because pretending you didn't notice was how people ended up dead. The waitress did not act. Not yet. She moved the way she always did, measured, unremarkable, deliberate. Plates out. Glasses refilled. Chairs adjusted with quiet efficiency. From the outside, nothing about her suggested urgency. Inside, every detail was being recorded. She passed the table again, slower this time. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to listen. The conversation had shifted. It always did, once food arrived and guards relaxed. Voices dropped. Words shortened. Jokes disappeared. What replaced them was something colder, transactional, precise. "Timing's tight," one of the men said. The boss nodded once. "It always is." The bodyguard didn't respond. He stood slightly behind the boss now, eyes forward, hands folded loosely in front of him. His posture looked correct. Professional. But there was no tension in it. No readiness. He wasn't waiting for danger. He was waiting for completion. The waitress felt her pulse pick up. She moved toward the bar, pretending to wipe down a spotless counter, her ears still tuned to the table behind her. The men spoke in fragments now, sentences cut short, thoughts left unfinished. That was how they communicated when the meaning mattered more than the words. "Clean," someone said quietly. "No noise." "Inside." "Inside." The word settled in her chest like a weight. She glanced over her shoulder. The doors to the restaurant were closed. Curtains drawn. No one else was coming in tonight. Inside meant here. She watched the bodyguard again. This time, she noticed something else. He wasn't scanning the room anymore. Not the entrance. Not the staff. Not the corners. His attention was fixed on nothing at all. That was wrong. People whose job it is to keep someone alive don't relax unless they believe the danger has already passed, or been reassigned. Her mind moved quickly now, replaying earlier moments she'd dismissed. The way he'd arrived before the boss but hadn't checked the exits. The way he'd subtly repositioned himself after the first course. The phone glance. Confirmation. She felt it then, unmistakably. The bodyguard wasn't protecting the boss tonight. He was making sure nothing interfered. A glass shattered somewhere in the kitchen. The sharp sound echoed briefly through the dining room before dissolving into laughter. No one at the table reacted. Except her. Her hands trembled as she gathered the broken pieces, crouching to clean them up. Her reflection fractured in the shards on the floor, eyes wide, breath shallow. This was not her world. She was not supposed to understand this. Wasn't supposed to notice patterns meant to stay hidden. But now she had. And knowing something like this came with a cost. She stood slowly, forcing herself to breathe evenly, and returned to the dining room. As she approached the table again, the boss leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident. "Another bottle," he said without looking at her. She nodded and turned away, her thoughts racing. If she was wrong, she would look foolish at best. If she was right, staying silent would make her complicit. Her eyes flicked to the bodyguard one more time. For just a second, his gaze met hers. There was no surprise there. No confusion. Only patience. Her stomach dropped. He knew she was watching. That was the moment everything changed. She carried the wine bottle back toward the table, every step heavier than the last. The distance between her and the boss felt impossibly wide now, not measured in feet, but in power, in consequence. She set the bottle down carefully, hands steady despite the noise in her head. The room hummed with quiet inevitability. She had crossed an invisible line simply by noticing. And now she understood something else, too. Whatever was about to happen was already in motion. The waitress retreated to the service corridor, but the room followed her. Not physically. Not yet. But the tension did. It clung to her shoulders, tightened her breathing, sharpened every sound until even the soft hum of the refrigerator felt too loud. She stood still for a moment, palms pressed lightly against the stainless steel counter, grounding herself. Think. Not panic. Think. She replayed everything again, slower this time. The words. The pauses. The bodyguard's behavior. The moment their eyes met. Patience. That was the detail she couldn't shake. If he'd been startled, if he'd looked away, corrected himself, adjusted his stance, she might have convinced herself she was imagining things. But he hadn't. He'd looked at her the way someone looks at a clock they've already checked. Certain of the time. She closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't a robbery. Not a public hit. Not something loud or fast. Whatever was planned would be quiet. Surgical. Confined to this room. Inside. The word returned, heavier now. She stepped back into the dining area, forcing her pace to remain even. No rushing. No hesitation. She picked up plates from a nearby table, her movements automatic, while her attention stayed locked on the private booth at the back. The boss was leaning forward now, elbows on the table, listening. His face was relaxed, engaged. He trusted the men around him. Trusted the system he'd built. Trusted the man standing behind him. The bodyguard shifted slightly, adjusting his jacket. A small movement, meaningless to anyone else. But she noticed what it exposed, just for a moment. An earpiece. Her breath caught. He hadn't been using it earlier. She looked away quickly, her heart pounding. That was the crack. The confirmation she hadn't known she was waiting for. The bodyguard wasn't receiving instructions anymore. He was receiving updates. She moved toward the kitchen, her mind racing ahead of her body. If the plan was already active, then time mattered. But she still didn't know how much time, or how the end would come. Gun. Poison. A staged emergency. She listened harder now, filtering out everything that didn't matter. Laughter. Cutlery. Low music from the speakers. Then she heard it. Once he signs, someone said softly. A pause. Then it's done. The boss nodded. No loose ends. The bodyguard's jaw tightened. Just for a second. That was all it took. Loose ends. She felt cold. The realization settled into place with terrifying clarity, not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, undeniable alignment of facts. The deal wasn't about money changing hands tonight. It was about ownership. And the boss himself was part of the exchange. She stopped walking. If the bodyguard was selling him out, then the safest place in the room was the one no one was watching closely. Her. She was invisible by design. No one expected her to act. No one expected her to understand. That was her only advantage. But it came with a question she couldn't avoid anymore. If she spoke, she became visible. If she stayed silent, she lived with what happened next. She felt her throat tighten, fear and responsibility colliding in her chest. She had never been brave. Never imagined herself stepping into something like this. Her life had been small on purpose. Predictable. Safe. This was not her story. And yet, it was unfolding around her. She glanced at the exit. At the hallway leading to the back door. She could leave now. Clock out early. Say she felt sick. No one would stop her. The boss laughed again, louder this time. He raised his glass in a casual toast. To smooth endings, he said. The bodyguard smiled faintly. Something inside her snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough. She realized then that the most dangerous thing in the room wasn't the plan. It was the assumption that no one would interrupt it. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She didn't know how she would do it yet. Didn't know what words she would use or how close she would have to get. But she knew this. If the truth stayed silent much longer, it would die with him. And once that happened, she would never forgive herself for choosing safety over a life she could have saved. She took a slow breath and turned back toward the table. The moment was coming. Whether she was ready or not. The room felt smaller now. Not because anyone had moved, but because the truth had finished assembling itself. The waitress stood near the edge of the dining floor, tray balanced in her hands, her body doing what it had been trained to do while her mind raced ahead of the moment. She watched the table closely, no longer guessing, no longer searching for meaning. She already had it. The bodyguard shifted his weight again. Subtle. Almost graceful. But this time, she knew what she was seeing. He was positioning himself away from the boss. Not protectively. Strategically. The men at the table leaned in as a document was slid across the polished surface. Thick paper. Heavy. Important. The boss reached for it without hesitation, skimming the first page as if this were just another night, another agreement. Another transaction. The waitress noticed something else now, something she'd missed before. The exits. Not the doors themselves, but the way the room had been arranged around them. Chairs subtly angled. Tables repositioned. Pathways narrowed. Controlled. She realized then that the restaurant wasn't just closed for privacy. It was closed for containment. Her breath slowed as the final pieces locked into place. This wasn't a plan waiting to begin. It was a plan already in its final phase. Everything up to this moment, the meal, the conversation, the relaxed laughter, had been designed to keep the boss exactly where he was. Calm. Comfortable. Still. The bodyguard touched his earpiece again, this time longer. Almost reverently. A silent confirmation. The waitress felt a rush of cold clarity. This was the last window. She took a step forward, then stopped. Not yet. Not without certainty. She needed proof, not for herself anymore, but for him. Her eyes moved back to the bodyguard, watching for something, anything, that would confirm what she already knew. And then she saw it. A nod. Small. Barely there. Given to no one in the room. Her stomach dropped. The betrayal was no longer theoretical. It was active. The boss signed the document with a smooth, confident stroke, unaware that the signature marked more than a deal. As he slid the pen back across the table, the bodyguard's posture changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. He relaxed. As if a burden had been lifted. As if his role was complete. The waitress felt a tight pressure in her chest. The moment stretched, thick and unreal. No alarms. No raised voices. No visible weapons. Just inevitability. She understood now why nothing felt rushed. The danger wasn't coming fast. It was coming clean. The men at the table began to rise, chairs scraping softly against the floor. One of them glanced toward the exit, then back to the boss. "Shall we?" he said. The boss stood, adjusting his jacket, still composed. Still in control. Still alive. For now. The waitress stepped forward before fear could catch up with her resolve. She moved toward the table, heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the floor itself resisted her. This was the point of no return. If she was wrong, she would humiliate herself, or worse. If she was right, speaking would change everything. She reached the table and set the tray down gently, hands steady despite the storm inside her. The boss barely glanced at her. To him, she was background noise. Part of the environment. That invisibility was the only reason she was still standing. The bodyguard noticed her immediately. His eyes sharpened. Not angry. Not alarmed. Curious. As if he were watching an unexpected variable enter a closed equation. The waitress leaned slightly closer to the boss, close enough to speak without raising her voice. She could smell the wine on the table, the leather of his jacket, the faint metallic tang of money and power. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This was it. One moment. One chance. Because once the next step happened, once he moved toward the exit, there would be no interrupting what had already been set in motion. She drew a breath. And in that breath, the truth waited, ready to be spoken, ready to shatter the illusion of safety that had held the room together all night. The bodyguard's hand twitched. The boss turned slightly toward her. And the future of everyone in that room balanced on what she was about to say. The sentence didn't come out loud. It didn't need to. The waitress leaned in just enough that the world narrowed to the space between her and the man everyone feared. Her voice stayed low, steady, controlled, chosen carefully so it would land where it needed to and nowhere else. "Your bodyguard sold you out," she said. A breath. "You're the payment." Nothing happened. Not at first. The restaurant didn't erupt. No chairs flew back. No guns were drawn. The music continued to play softly overhead, indifferent to what had just been released into the room. But something broke all the same. The Mafia boss froze. Not in shock. Not in panic. In recognition. His hand, which had been adjusting the cuff of his jacket, stopped mid-motion. His eyes, dark and sharp, didn't move to the waitress. They didn't need to. They shifted, slowly, deliberately, to the man standing behind him. The bodyguard. For a fraction of a second, no one breathed. The bodyguard's expression didn't change. No anger. No denial. But the stillness he'd been wearing all night, so carefully controlled, tightened. Just enough. The boss straightened slightly, the movement so subtle it would have gone unnoticed by anyone who didn't understand power. His face remained calm, but the air around him changed. Danger replaced comfort. "Is that so?" the boss said quietly. Not to the waitress. To the space between them. The bodyguard didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. The waitress felt her legs threaten to give out, adrenaline flooding her system now that the words were out. She stepped back instinctively, heart hammering, knowing her part, whatever the outcome, was finished. The boss reached for his glass, lifted it, then set it back down untouched. His eyes never left the bodyguard. "You've been with me a long time," he said conversationally. "Long enough to know I don't enjoy surprises." The bodyguard swallowed. A single drop of sweat traced its way down his temple. "I can explain," he said. The boss smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Precisely. "Of course you can," he replied. "That's what worries me." He stood, turning fully now, closing the distance between them. The men at the table remained seated, motionless, watching the shift with quiet understanding. This was not chaos. This was correction. The boss leaned in close to the bodyguard, his voice low enough that only those meant to hear it could. "You see," he continued calmly, "the problem with selling me out is that it assumes I'm already dead." The bodyguard's eyes flicked toward the exits. The boss noticed. "Ah," he said softly. Still counting on timing. He took a step back and raised a hand, not as a signal of violence, but of pause. The room obeyed. He turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging the waitress. Their eyes met for the first time that night. There was no suspicion there. No anger. Only assessment. "You," he said, nodding once. "Go." She didn't hesitate. She turned and walked away, every step feeling unreal, as if the floor beneath her might disappear at any moment. She passed through the dining room, through the corridor, through the staff door into the cool night air beyond. Only when the door closed behind her did her breath come apart. Inside, the restaurant remained quiet. Whatever happened next wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be public. It wouldn't be fast. But it would be final. And all of it, every outcome, every consequence, had pivoted on one sentence spoken by someone no one had thought to watch. The waitress kept walking, the sounds of the city swallowing her whole. She didn't look back. Because some moments don't need witnesses. They just need to happen. The city absorbed her without comment. Cars passed. Voices drifted from open doorways. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed and then faded, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The waitress walked several blocks before she realized her hands were shaking. Not violently. Just enough to remind her that her body had finally caught up with what her mind had done. She stopped beneath a streetlight and forced herself to breathe. In. Out. The night was cool against her skin. Real. Ordinary. Indifferent. Inside the restaurant, time moved differently. The boss remained standing where she had left him, his presence anchoring the room. No one spoke. No one rushed. The men at the table understood the rhythm of moments like this. Violence wasn't the goal. Control was. The bodyguard stood perfectly still. Too still. "You chose an interesting way to end a long partnership," the boss said at last. His voice was calm, almost reflective. "I would have expected something messier." The bodyguard said nothing. There was nothing left to offer that hadn't already been weighed and found insufficient. The boss gestured lightly with two fingers. Not toward the exits. Toward the back corridor. "Let's take a walk," he said. Two men stepped forward, not hurried, not aggressive. Just present. The bodyguard hesitated for half a second, then complied. Resistance would have been pointless now. Whatever protection he thought he had secured had evaporated the moment the sentence reached the boss's ear. Deals built on secrecy rarely survive daylight. The door to the private area closed softly behind them. No one else moved. No one needed to. What followed did not involve shouting. There were no raised voices, no visible struggle. The kind of men who operated in this world understood efficiency. They understood silence. They understood that consequences didn't need an audience. The bodyguard would not be seen again. And if he was remembered at all, it would be briefly, as a man who miscalculated how closely power listens when it knows how to. Back on the street, the waitress reached her apartment just before dawn. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and leaned against it as it closed behind her. Only then did her legs finally give way. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, heart still racing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was empty in the way people are after surviving something they never planned to face. Later that morning, the news would mention nothing unusual. No incident. No disturbance. The restaurant would open as scheduled. Tables reset. Glassware polished. Staff rotations unchanged. Business would continue. By the following week, whispers would circulate quietly through the city's invisible networks. About a betrayal uncovered. About a man who disappeared. About a boss who lived because he listened. The waitress would hear none of it. She returned to work 2 days later, wearing the same uniform, tying her hair back the same way. She moved through the dining room unseen, unnoticed, exactly as before. No one thanked her. No one warned her again. And she didn't expect them to. Some nights, when the room was quiet and the tables were full, she would catch herself watching people more closely. Listening longer. Understanding how thin the line really was between power and vulnerability. She never spoke of that night. She didn't need to. Because the truth she'd learned stayed with her, not as fear, but as clarity. That the world doesn't always change with explosions or headlines. Sometimes it pivots on something much smaller. A moment of attention. A refusal to look away. A single sentence spoken at the exact second it mattered. And somewhere in the city, a man who was still alive would occasionally pause in crowded rooms and listen a little harder when someone insignificant stepped close. Because once, someone no one was watching saved him. And that was a lesson power never forgets. Time did what it always does. It smoothed the sharp edges. Weeks passed. Then months. The city kept moving, indifferent to the quiet correction that had taken place behind closed doors. New deals replaced old ones. Names shifted in conversations that never reached the surface. The absence left behind by one man was absorbed without ceremony. Power doesn't mourn. It reallocates. The restaurant remained unchanged. Same lighting. Same menu. Same polished floors reflecting faces that never looked down long enough to notice who was watching. The waitress continued her shifts, arriving on time, leaving without comment, blending seamlessly into the machinery of other people's importance. To everyone else, she was exactly what she had always been. Invisible. But invisibility, she had learned, was not weakness. It was position. Sometimes, as she cleared tables late at night, she caught fragments of conversations that reminded her how close danger always was. How often people assumed loyalty without testing it, how casually they underestimated the quiet ones standing nearby. She listened. She always listened. Across the city, the Mafia boss adjusted. He trusted fewer people now. Asked fewer questions aloud. When meetings grew comfortable, he grew cautious. When rooms felt safe, he paid attention to the smallest disruptions. The pauses, the glances, the people who spoke only when necessary. Especially them. He never asked for the waitress's name. He didn't need it. Knowing she existed was enough. Because what she had given him wasn't just information. It was perspective. A reminder that power isn't protected by walls or weapons, but by awareness. And awareness often comes from places no one thinks to watch. There was no reward. No envelope slipped quietly across a table. No gesture of gratitude. That wasn't how this world worked. The waitress didn't expect one. Her life didn't transform. She didn't rise. She didn't disappear into myth. She paid rent. Bought groceries. Took the same route to work each day. But something inside her had shifted permanently. She no longer mistook silence for safety, or stillness for peace. She understood now how stories really end, not with justice or spectacle, but with quiet corrections that only a few people ever notice. One night, long after closing, she stood alone by the window and watched the city lights flicker against the dark. Somewhere out there, powerful men still believed they were untouchable. Somewhere else, someone quiet was paying attention. She turned off the light and locked the door behind her. Tomorrow would come. And when it did, the world would keep turning, unaware that it once pivoted on a sentence spoken softly by someone no one thought mattered. That was the truth beneath it all. Power listens. It just rarely admits it. And sometimes, the most dangerous voice in the room is the one everyone forgot to hear. If you enjoy stories where power shifts in silence, subscribe for more.